Right. Welcome everybody to our second panel. This is the second of our education and development career panels for 2022. This is a event put together for or by the Comparative Education International Development Community here at Moray House at the University of Edinburgh. My name is Will Smith. I'm the community coordinator. I'm really excited to have what is an excellent panel of individuals from a variety of backgrounds and different experiences to share how they got in their career and some tips for students looking to potentially pursue a career in comparative ed and international development. Please feel free, if you're going to tweet about the event, to tweet at us at Moray House CEID, or follow us where we share all of our events out. The aim of this event is to expose students and others interested in the wide variety of work in education international development, expose them to that work that's being done by those that are currently positioned in organizations that we might be interested in either hearing more about or potentially pursuing in the future. This provides a space for panelists to share their career journey, advice, and challenges, and for students and other interested individuals to ask questions related to the current occupation or career path to these experts that are working in the field. The very basic panel structure today. I've asked each panelist within about 7 minutes to share their current position and the highlights version of their career. So we have some more junior professionals and some very senior professionals. For some, it will be quite a challenge to pack their career highlights into 7 minutes. So I want to thank everybody for that. And then the hope is that the majority of the second half of our panel today will be open and question and answer. So again, you can ask questions as we go along in the chat box, or you can wait for that section and raise your hand to join us there. So we've got 6 panelists joining us from all over the world today. Thank you. It's great to see many of you, sometimes for the first time in a couple of years. I'm going to read through the panelists and then I'll invite you one-on-one to come and share your experience. So we're going to start with Renato Opertti, Senior Education Expert at the International Bureau of Education, or IBE-UNESCO. And we're going to hear from Milagros Concha-Fernandez Sanchez, who's a civil society officer at the Global Partnership for Education. We'll go to Saba Saeed, who's a senior program manager at Idara-e-Taleem-o-Aagahi, or ITA Pakistan. She'll be followed by Gustavo Lopez, who's a researcher in international development and education at the National Foundation for Education Research. Our 5th presenter will be Sujata Bordolia, who's an education and gender specialist at UNGAI, or the United Nations Girls Education Initiative. And wrapping up things will be Lucy Serna, who's a project leader at the Directorate for Education and Skills for the OECD. So thanks so much, our panelists, for taking time to share your experiences with everybody today. I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting and valuable conversation. So the structure is going to be slightly different than what I just promised you. We're actually going to have Renato share his experience, and then because he has to leave, he's going to have an opportunity to address a few questions before departing. So if you have any specific questions for Renato, we're going to have a brief question and answer time immediately following his presentation to give you a chance to ask questions around that. So Renato, I'm going to stop presenting and ask you to go ahead and share your slide. And looking forward to hearing you as you kick us off today. Yeah, Renato, you're muted. I don't know. So I think your slide's coming up now, but I can't hear you. Can I unmute you? I don't know if I can unmute you. Hold on a second.
Okay, now
there we go.
I was not allowed to talk. Okay, thank you so much, Will, and I congratulate you for this initiative, for this career panel, and very, very honored to be with very prestigious colleagues from all over the world that they're going to share their experience. I have tried to do something that is a little bit trying to respond to your questions. I mean, in terms of 8 clues that we think that on keep progressing as a professional. I will try to see, well, what are the 8 clues that, from my experience, are key to keep continue progressing. It's not something that ends, it's a never-ending process. The first clue for us is the local journey. I mean, it's like putting together the global and the local, going from the local to the global, going from the global to the local, from the local to the global, as a permanently issue that implies linking different contexts, different challenges coming from the local. My local was Uruguay, my country. The global was UNESCO and worldwide. And there was always a connection between what I see in UNESCO worldwide and what I see in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is a back and forth relationship. I mean, we think at UNESCO, for example, that the curriculum is local. It's global understanding with local contextualization. So this back and forth relationship for us in your journey as a professional is very important. The second point is assume transformation. I mean, reframe in all your work the transformative nature of education as a key social, economic, culture, citizenship, and community policy that lays foundation for better sustainable futures. I mean, what you're doing is not to reproduce reality, but to transform reality. And that implies very much speaking to the post-pandemic era that you're going to work on. And that is be much more proactive, much be more profound and more proactive in terms of audacious ideas. I mean, we need to think out of the box to really make education transformative. So it's time for much more profound, bold intervention to educate the new generations. It's transformation, it's not reproduction. The third clue is about strength and versatility, because in this world you're going to perform different roles. And maybe you're going to perform these different roles with very short notice. I mean, you have to develop a set of interconnected competencies related to autonomous and forward-looking thinking, related to disruptive creativity, to empathy, and to resilience. And you have to be open-minded to perform different roles in terms of facilitating dialogues, knowledge production and dissemination, capacity development, technical assistance. You have to celebrate diversity as part of your work. The fourth element is cultivate nearness. We have to be able to appreciate and build upon diversities and differences across cultures, across traditions, across affiliations, across perspectives. You have to connect. We have to connect with people. We have to connect with their understanding of education and understanding of social policies and all individual as such. We have to have much more connection with people. The 5 clue is deep understanding. I mean, going deeper into understanding of issues that is beyond our silos. We tend to reproduce in our work silos approaches, silos intervention, fragmented ideas. And the work today is much more about connecting pieces to make meaningful understanding of the issues that really are worthwhile for all of us. I mean, going from silos approaches to interconnected understanding, going deeper. That's what we call deeper understanding of issues and thematics. The 6th clue is lab substance. Be able to have intellectual curiosity as a strong driver. Question yourself, take risks, not be afraid to make mistakes, but be substantial in your work. Be able to make a difference, a value added in what you're doing. The 7th clue is be aspirational, ambitious, and futuristic about your professional development, but not be obsessed and not be so much instrumental. Get your dreams, ideas, time to ripe, to develop. Don't be anxious. Be ambitious, but not anxious. I mean, you have to have time for things to come and to evolve. And that be tolerant with yourself in managing your anxiety to progress and with the other ones. And the last clue is allow yourself. Allow yourself to be yourself. I always ask one question that maybe help you. Every day I ask myself, I have kept 50% of my time devoted to what I like to do in our time schedule of one day. Ask your question, what's the percentage that you have devoted to do things that are sensitive, that are meaningful, that are enjoyable for you? My minimum standard is 50%. And I'm getting older, as Will said, getting senior. My standard is now 70%. So 70% of the time of my life, I devoted to do things that I enjoy, that are substantial for me, that are meaningful, that are sensitive. So wrapping up, and I think that we are in the time, Will, no? We are more or less on the time, is that we are in a moment that for you is fantastic. You are going to build the new education and the new social landscape of the future, of the transformative nature of education and society. So be substantial, be aspirational, cultivate nearness, go deeper into the issues, strengthen your versatility, assume transformation, and go and do this fantastic journey between the global and the local. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Renato. I really appreciate you getting us started here. We've got a couple of opportunities to ask questions before Renato leaves. So if, again, as we're looking, ask questions, you can add them to the chat box, or if anybody has a question specific to Renato, his advice that he's provided, or anything that he shared today, feel free to add it to the chat box or raise your hand. So Renato, as we're waiting, I'm gonna ask a question. So you talked about the importance of connecting with people, and you've spent a lot of time at a global organization, which tends to kind of, from the outside, look at a very macro perspective. Can you talk about, in your experience at IBE and other places internationally, how do you go from that kind of global to local? How do you ensure that you're connecting with people on the ground?
Well, that well is an excellent question. I mean, it's been it's trying to understand people, try to understand cultures, try to respect cultures, try to celebrate diversity. But also when you're in the field, you have to think to move things forward. You have to be respectful, but you also have to be ambitious in terms of moving the agendas forward. I mean, it's not when you go to the field that your discourse is to reproduce what people are saying, because it doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. If you go only to legitimate what they are doing, anyone in the field, in any sector, in any social sector, for example, you are not helping them. You are not supporting them to move forward. So you have to find the right connection between trust, generate a trust from them, but also be able, based on that trust and that collaboration, to put very clearly issues that for them are critical for moving forward. My impression is sometimes, and from UNESCO, that we have this tension between being so respectful for countries and being so attentive to them that by the end of the day, we don't provide them substantial value added for moving forward. So the question is, now, Will and colleagues, that we are in a period of transformation of education of society, we have to be much more profound in the way we address issues to make a difference in the well-being and sustainability of the countries. And we are not prepared for that. We are more prepared to deliver on what countries want than deliver on what country needs to move forward. And that's a difference. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't have to do what countries want to do, but there is a tension between countries reproducing what they are doing, governments, different political parties, civil society, etc. But also we have to be able to shed light on what they shall do to really make a difference in the well-being, sustainability of development of their population. So we need to be much more bold, much more profound, I believe. My impression in UNESCO sometimes is that we are much more conservative sometimes than proactive in that sense. And that's a big difference in the future, because we will need much more profound dialogue, a much more profound perspective, a much more progressive perspective. And for example, in our area of work, that is curriculum and education, we have to be very clear to say that we need a transformational and progressive curricula. It's not I mean, we need that if we want the new generation to live in a sustainable world. I mean, there is no alternative to that. But so, and you know very well that sometimes curriculum reproduce what we know, what the society is. It doesn't transform society. So that's why I say assume transformation. I mean, we are not in a moment of adjustment. We are not even in a moment of reform. We are in a moment of big paradigm transformation of society and of education and social policies. So I think that the profiling we need for the future is different from what we have today. And for young people like many who are here, they will have to assume that, because if not, there is not going to be future for the new generations in terms of sustainability, in terms of a sustainable planet, in terms of sustainable and pacific coexistence and dialogue and inclusiveness and fairness. So the big challenge is to think also as social people, as with a social compromise. I mean, it's time to regain the idea that we have a social compromise with society, a social engagement with society. We forget sometimes that.
Going off of your poll, there's a question here from Maya Weinberg, sorry, who says her question is that you mentioned the importance of taking risk in your career. And I mean, you're talking about even IBE being bold and kind of its declarations. You mentioned the importance of taking risk in your career. Can you give an example of a risk you took, or that maybe you supported someone else to take?
That's an excellent question. I took a risk when 2 years ago I decided to leave UNESCO to go back to my country to work from the region in education. And after many years working in UNESCO, and then that's why I talk about the global and local. And then working in the local, UNESCO asked me to connect again to UNESCO. So, and it was a very important risk, because I have everything in UNESCO to continue. I was staff, I was UNESCO staff. I can retire at 65, 60. There is no problem of working there. I was in Geneva working very well with no. But I took the risk because I want to do a difference in our region, in Latin American region. So I went back. But then when I went back, UNESCO asked me to come back. So now I'm working in this local context, being localized in Montevideo, Uruguay, by working connected to UNESCO worldwide. And it's a fantastic experience. My previous experience was doing that from Geneva. Now that experience has been done from Montevideo. Make a difference? Yeah. Makes a difference probably in the time, hours, and all the décalage horaire and everything like that. But I'm very happy because I believe that coming back to my country and from my country going back to the global it's been a wonderful experience. So take risks, but let me just say one thing to Maya also. Take risks and be able to get the risk developed. I mean, don't be so anxious to get tomorrow what you want. Maybe you're going to get in, maybe not tomorrow, but in 10 days. Let things happen. Not be so anxious to get things today. I find, Will, and let me just finish by this before there's another question there, that sometimes I find that young people are very, I mean, I understand them. They are very eager to move. And sometimes they don't enjoy the moment. enjoy what you're doing, not being so instrumental what you're going to get in 3, 4, or 5 years. Enjoy, profit what you're doing now. There's another question here. I think that's from Gabriel, no?
Yeah, Renato, can I? So I do need to move on with the other presenters, but
Okay,
you have a couple of questions
sorry,
in the
sorry,
chat.
sorry.
No problem. It's great to see questions in the chat. I would encourage you, if you've got some time before you need to leave, if you can maybe respond to some of this in the chat.
I will respond by chat. Yeah, and then
Yeah.
Sorry, I have to leave because I have to do on a mission.
Yeah.
But before I go, I will respond the question in the chat. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks, Renato. And so some of the questions in the chat. So Gabrielle, I appreciate your question on basically advice on working for UNESCO, but we'll also have kind of a broader conversation on advice across these organizations at the end. So if Renato doesn't get a full response to that, that'll be part of the full conversation at the end. So let's go back now to our next presenter. Okay, next up, so now we'll have 5 presentations, each sharing for about 7 minutes, and then we'll have a full discussion at the end, but feel free to continue to ask questions. If you've presented and somebody has asked you a question in the chat box, feel free to jump on and answer it there or provide other advice in the chat box as we go along. It's a great way to continue the conversation. So I want to now invite Milagros up, who's a civil society officer at GPE. So Milagros, welcome. Good to see you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes. Yep.
Yes. Hi, everyone. So it's really an honor to be here today. I have a super long name, so I'm just going to go by Mili for all of you. It's really it's a hard way to follow Renato after his presentation, and I mean, you'll understand what he's meaning after working a little bit on the after you're out of university, but it's really true what he was saying. So I just wanted to echo that. So I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit. I'm not going to go over my whole career path because I think you can just stalk me on LinkedIn and find out who I've worked for and the type of subjects that I've dealt with. But I really wanted to kind of give you, I don't know if advice, but just some pieces of information that I wish somebody would have told me 10 years ago when I started my career. So I work for the Global Partnership for Education, GPE. GPE is a trust fund of the World Bank. We provide funds to ministries of education of our partner countries, but we are much more than a fund. We are a partnership mostly. I think that's our main asset. Sorry, my dog is really paying me to let come of my lap. So if you see a dog jumping in, I apologize. The partnership itself, it's our biggest asset because within GPE, all of our decisions are made out of a convergence of civil society, teachers associations, donor countries, ministries of education of developing country partners, and private foundations, research centers, etc. So really our biggest asset is the fact that we can make those connections and make sure that those type of interactions are happening on the ground to enhance the impact of GPE and their funds. So for GPE, I work for another fund within GPE that is called Education Out Loud, or EOL. Through this fund, we support civil society organizations at the national level, but also at the transnational and regional level. So we as GPE are not an implementer organization, we just channel grants. So my job and the job of my team, which we really are 2 people, my supervisor and I basically, we provide oversight to our grant agent. And my work is very diverse. Sometimes I'm coordinating to write blogs, not me writing blogs, but really trying to make sure that our grantees are getting the time and space and the global space to be able to showcase their work. Some other times I'm leading consultations with different stakeholders dealing with this type of civil society support in country. Some other times I'm preparing papers for my supervisor to go to the board of GPE and request for more funding for civil society for the coming years. So really, it's a very diverse work, and I'm really, really happy to be in this position, but it just didn't happen overnight. I have done my share of different type of works within the international development sector. I've worked for universities, I've worked for NGOs, I've worked for multilaterals, doing everything from fundraising to grant writing to research, advocacy, policy. And I think that I would share with you my 3 main advices after all of these 10 years of going through in different directions, all within education, of course, but it's been a long journey. So my first piece of advice would be knowing what you want exactly might be daunting in a field like ours. So sometimes it's better to know what you don't want to do. International education has so many aspects. There is early childhood education, primary education, literacy, civil society. There are so many aspects to it. And many people throughout my career used to tell me, you need to find what your niche is and then just focus on that and become an expert on it. And that was really hard because there's so much to explore. And I was kind of becoming obsessed with, okay, I need to find what I'm really good at or what I want to focus, and then I'm going to do my PhD on that, and I'm going to become the expert on this. And in fact, it's not how reality works. Throughout my experience, I was working, I remember, in an advocacy organization, and I loved working with civil society organizations, but I didn't like necessarily doing advocacy. So that was one first step. Then I wanted to do research. I was so obsessed with it, and I kept telling my supervisor at the time, I want to do research, I want to do research. Life took me to Paris, and I ended up working for the GEM report. I was doing finally research. It wasn't field research, it was desk research, but still research. And after a few months, I remember telling Manu, I was like, I hate research. I don't like this. It's not for me to be in front of a computer all day. I'm a bit more of a people's person. So I ended up realizing, okay, I don't like advocacy, but I love civil society. And I like working in a multicultural setting. I love working for a multilateral, but I don't like doing research. So what can I do? And those type of clues led me to the job that I have now. So don't become obsessed on finding out what exactly is your niche. Just maybe experimenting and finding out what you don't want is going to lead you to the right direction. My second piece of advice would be networking is really key in our field, and you have to do it, unfortunately or fortunately for those that are more extroverts. But take it from me, I used to be asking for coffee to anyone that I would run into that would have a job that I found that was interesting or that was doing some interesting work. But sometimes it's, there are people out there that have the jobs that you might want and that are doing interesting work and that also have something on the way they do development that resonates with you. And I would say that those are the people that you want to end up meeting with. I don't know. I remember having coffee with this person in DC that was doing really interesting work on RCTs, and I was convinced I wanted to do a PhD and focus on RCTs at that time. I'm not doing that anymore at all. And he told me something like, well, if you want to do a PhD and focus on RCTs, you have 3 options: Harvard, Princeton, or Stanford. And I was looking into the Paris School of Economics at the time. And he was like, no, if you want to go and enjoy life, then go to Paris. If you want to do serious work, then Harvard, Princeton, or Stanford. And I mean, at that time, I was kind of like, okay, what is this? But it made me realize that, yeah, that's not the type of people I want to work with. And I don't have to work with that type of people. So he's very smart, and I appreciate the conversation I had with him, but you can be selective too with whom you're having coffees with. And then my third piece of advice would be that really it's very important to know your values and be yourself. The competition is fierce, as you know. Many of you here have really good qualifications and will probably be competing for the same jobs. And you all are capable of doing those jobs. But what's going to stand you out from the rest is your personality and the type of development that you want to do. Sometimes you try to, you're so fixated on getting a job at INGO or at the World Bank or OECD, etc. And you can adapt to the way they do things. And I think that's adding value to it. I think if you know what type of values you have, the way you want to have an impact in education, then you will be able to be yourself in the your values, and your impact will be multiplied more than that to the organizational or an organization that perhaps doesn't resonate. I don't know if I'm taking my time. I'm exceeding, but I'm going to stop there. And again, thank you for the opportunity. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Millie. I know we're having some slight audio difficulties, at least on my end, at the very last bit. So in questions, if you've got questions as we come up to discussion, especially on the piece of knowing your values and that bit of advice, maybe we can come back to Millie at the end. Please do feel free to add questions to Millie in the chat box as we continue along with our panelists. So Saba, I know we had some technical difficulties. Hopefully you're able to join.
Yes, I am. So
is
it okay, Smith, if I keep my video off? Because it might just cut off.
That will work. We'd much rather hear from you. So, yep, sounds good.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, I'm very, very excited to be a part of this gathering, which makes me, think about my days in high school and university. I'm sure many, fellow panelists would agree that back then we had very, very few opportunities to learn about career pathways, and decisions regarding career were mostly influenced, by what others are doing rather than what's really trending. So you all are very, very lucky that you get a chance to speak to some of the most esteemed panelists that joined us today and, in Career Panel 1. I basically, I come from a background which is, Global South and a civil society organization. I did my bachelor's in economics and political science because I wanted to do something which could lead me to a wide range of career opportunities. Because I was in economics, by default, I was assigned to pick up internship in the banking sector, which I did. But as soon as I started off, I knew that this is not something that I want for a career. I want a job which is not desk-based, which is more active, which is more participatory, which is, which offers exposure to the society. At that time, I knew very, very little about what we call today the development sector. So I just, started looking for jobs. Towards the end of my coursework, my instructors advised me to look for research jobs at civil society organizations because they are the ones working on ground, hands-on experience. So I just applied and I, got this job at ITA. I don't hesitate in confessing that I did not go there with, any sort of assumptions, motivation, and aspirations. My story is not like, oh, I have always thought of joining the education sector, so I picked up ITA. It's not like that at all. The point I'm trying to make is that it's okay to not being very clear on a career path early on. And it's okay to not being driven about a particular work unless you experience it in true spirit. So my first piece of advice would be to just know who you really are, where your passion lies, what is it that touches you. I knew that, desk work is not something that would be sustainable for me. I knew I love to interact with people. I knew I like to remain active. I knew I have to find a job which provides me with exposure. So because at this stage, you hardly know what your capacity is. You just know what your interests are and just follow your interest. Your first job may not be a great job, but you decide what is the career path that you want to choose. When you're working in the development sector, there are basically three streams of work. There is research, there is service delivery, and there is advocacy. These all are very iterative, very, very overlapping. However, you do need to establish your niche in one of the three areas. And for that, you need to spend at least a year or so doing all three. Research, advocacy, service delivery, they all go hand in hand. One cannot be done without the other. Each of these require a very, very different approach and a very, very different skill set. So maybe, if you're doing research, and especially in the context of Global South, it will often put you in a situation where you'll be compelled to compromise on robustness, on fidelity, but you still have to put your foot down and maintain quality standards. So working with ministries of education, convincing them on research findings, using that to lobby for improvement could be very hard. So just know what you can and cannot do. So the research does not end with, designing instrument or collecting the data. It's a lot more than that. So know what you can and cannot do. Service delivery, again, is altogether a very, very different area. And I think the most exciting one, because you get to work with beneficiaries and you get to see immediate positive results if, you have delivered effectively. But even then, you have to deal with a variety of stakeholders, and each one requires a very, very different way of working. Dealing with the government could be different. Dealing with schools could be very, very challenging. Dealing with community could be very time intensive. So just, be ready to face all sorts of issues if you embark on that. Advocacy stream is, I would say, particularly about collaboration and being compassionate towards those you are advocating for. And plus, you need to be extremely well-read and abreast of policies, laws, reforms, evidence, stats, and be able to write, policy documents and policy brief for a variety of audiences. So you just have to know what your interest is. Is it, because you'll be studying, I suppose, all three, skills that meet all three requirements, but you still have to know what your areas of interest are. And as soon as you start your job, I think that you should, work for something which provides you with an opportunity to interact with all three work streams, and then you may be able to decide what is it that touches you the most or drives you the most. Also, it's important at this, she rightly pointed out that there's a lot to international education. I mean, the girls' education, early childhood development, livelihoods, mental health, programs on second chance education, funding, even social impact bonds that are becoming a trend now. So there's a lot more to international education, and you just have to make a very, very wise choice. You could either join INGOs, development partners, you could choose to work with ministries, you could choose to work directly with school leaders, school leadership, or you could work in an organization such as not-for-profit organizations such as civil society, etc. So there are a couple of options out there, but you just have to know, be very firm.
Saba, I think we might have lost you for a second.
Sorry, is it?
Yeah, you're back.
Is it fine now?
Yep.
Yeah. So you need to interact with the right people, network with the right people, and know your strengths and weaknesses really well. So it's important, as you do your coursework and you do your practical exercises, just try to ask yourself, where is it that you see yourself in a year? And where is it that you see yourself in about 3 years? Because and how do you want to define yourself? Do you want to, remain restricted to a certain geography, to a certain area? Do you want to multitask? These are all the questions that you must think about before you start applying for jobs. There's a lot of competition, and you really have to make the right choice. That's all that I want to say. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Saba. So I really appreciate that you're starting to see some overlapping bits of tips from our presenters. So we're going to invite Gustavo up in a second. Again, please do continue to add questions. But Gustavo, it's great to have you here. I appreciate Saba talking about the variety of organizations that do work in this field, and you work at a slightly different type of organization than our first three. Great to have you, Gustavo. It's over to you.
Yes. Yeah, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. I saw in the chat different time zones. So yeah, it's really exciting to meet my fellow panelists, the panel organizers, and to have the chance to talk with you attendees. So first, thanks really very much to the CEID community for this very, very kind invitation. As Will introduced me, I am Gustavo Lopez, and I am a researcher in international development and education. I work at the National Foundation for Educational Research. NFER is the acronym, and I will be saying NFER the whole time. Based in England, I work from the head office in the London region, where I'm based. NFER is the organization that's probably the closest to what you are used to, and that's present in my career. It is an independent organization that provides education research, evaluation, and assessment worldwide. We have more than 75 years working on education in the United Kingdom specifically, and have started to expand our work into countries across all continents, especially sub-Saharan Africa, quite many years ago already. And in all these places, our goal is to support improvements within education systems by influencing practice and also classroom practice, specifically, and also by influencing education policies through informing policymakers and other education stakeholders. And as I said, always in an evidence-based way, which we are specialized in, so through research, evaluation, and assessments. Our staff at NFR, well, we have backgrounds like me in research, in academia, in teaching, in policy, and this is for the office staff, but we also work in very close partnership with a network of consultants and organizations in various countries. And these two aspects, the strengths that we have in our staff in the offices, plus the partnership with consultants and organizations, make it possible for us to deliver very special work that is really grounded in deep subject knowledge in education, international education, and a thorough understanding of how education systems work. And it allows us as an organization to work in a range of languages to deliver projects that are responsive to local contexts. And you as students of comparative education and development, you know that these are things that really make the whole difference at the end of a piece of research. We work with government departments, government agencies, NGOs, bilateral and multilateral donors, civil society organizations, private organizations, philanthropies. So it's really broad, and just to finish the background to NFR, I think it's important to say that we are a not-for-profit organization, which means that we invest any surplus funds always directly back into research, development, and innovation in the education and development sector. So now coming to what I do at NFR, I am a team member of qualitative mixed methods and policy-oriented projects at the interface between development and education. In my case, these projects are both research assignments and evaluations. There are periods when I work on a single project for weeks or for months. And then there are periods when I work on more than one project at the same time, or during the same period, not at the same time. A big part of this work involves collecting, analyzing, and reporting on data, primary and secondary data, in different languages depending on the project. And in my case, in English, Portuguese, French, and Spanish. Then in my researcher role at NFR, I also support research and evaluation directors on practical aspects of project delivery, of project management, which are very important in an organization like ours. And that's an important distinction to how this is done, for instance, in academia. I also support on particular activities when we are bidding for projects and when we are preparing proposals. That's probably where there's a lot of overlap also with academia. And these are, the three areas related to projects. And then the fourth element in my role is really working in more internal on the business side of the organization, so not in connection with any projects, and here it's basically feeding into business development and technical development activities. So there's a great diversity of activities and hats in my role as a researcher. Of course, the emphasis is on projects and on technical, on methodological aspects. But in an environment like ours, this inevitably go hand in hand with project management and makes projects very dynamic. And then in my role in parallel, there is this great participation in business development, both through help in the bids, the proposals, and internally to consolidate and expand our service offer. We'll have time to talk about this at the end, but if you're interested in working with us, of course, please don't forget to keep an eye on our careers page. And more in relation to my background, well, this is my first job in social science in the Indian education research. and is also my first position in the international development field. I started this job when I was about to finish my master's in education and international development at the University of East Anglia, the UEA in England. But yeah, this job is not my first experience in education, not my first experience in international education, in research, also not in low and middle income countries. I am a former academic in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. And my area of expertise used to be, or still is, chemical engineering. My last appointment in this area was as a lecturer in a private not-for-profit university in Peru, in Lima, where I've had really one of the richest experiences in my life when it comes to teaching, to education, to research, to education research, to social research, and then to much more, even though this university was very much focused on science and engineering at the time. Before that, I taught STEM subjects, again, very much around chemical engineering as a graduate teaching assistant in France, in Marseille, where I also did my PhD in fluid mechanics and physics. And there's in this école, no, in this engineering school, I also studied for a master's in engineering, which was done in the framework of a double degree program with the university where many years ago I did my bachelor's in chemical engineering. This is a university situated in Brazil, in Porto Alegre. I come from Brazil, and that's where I started my career, which at that time was not as an academic, but really as a field engineer working in the chemical, in the petrochemical industry, really side by side with heavy machinery, heavy equipment, and hazardous chemicals. And yeah, so a different world, slightly different things from what I do today, but really all key contributors to my profile, to my skills, to my knowledge, and then to the fact that I am here today. I think if I look at the time that I probably exceeded my time, thanks again for listening. Happy to receive any questions, and please feel free to reach out to me later. You can easily find my contact details on the web.
Excellent. Thanks, Gustavo. Interesting to hear more of your background and a little bit of kind of this continual narrative on that it's not always a direct path to your current position. Sujata, it's good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you, Will, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I myself have learned so much from everybody else. Hi, everyone. My name is Sujata Bordoloi. I am from India, and I'm currently an education gender specialist at the UN Girls Education Initiative. So the UNGAI, as we call it, is a partnership. It's a multi-stakeholder partnership that was initiated by Kofi Annan in the backdrop of the Millennium Development Goals, really to accelerate progress on girls' education, which at the time, when we were looking at the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals around education, girls' education or the education of girls was very, very far behind. So Kofi Annan created this initiative to accelerate progress, to support organizations like UNESCO and UNICEF to work across not just UN agencies, but also civil society and as a partnership to drive progress on this. And we've really come a long way. UNGAI, because it's a partnership, it has worked across several different organizations, several different initiatives. And our main kind of way of working is three things. We do advocacy, policy advocacy with governments, with civil society, and globally with international development actors. We do evidence generation and promotion. So that's a lot of, we don't do research ourselves, but our job is to take research and make it into policy briefs and policy recommendations that practitioners and policymakers can easily understand. Because often research is becomes very technical, and so we need someone to break that down. And so and one of Ungai's role is to do that, to promote and disseminate evidence and policy recommendations. And the third piece is we work across young people, so working with young people across all of the work that we do. And that's something that we have learned over the last 10 years, I would say, not something that started in 2000. My particular role, I started with Ungai in 2015, and I was brought in to convene a working group or a coalition to put visibility on the issue of gender-based violence in and through education. So as we were developing the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, one of the things that came to light was the issue of violence in and around schools, and especially gender-based violence, which was becoming a barrier for girls to access education, but also overall education quality and learning. And so the coalition of partners were basically people from civil society organizations, from donors like USAID, France, and others, governments and academic institutions, as well as UN agencies, coming together to say that we need more visibility on this issue as an education issue, that it's not just a human rights issue, but also an education issue, which needs to be addressed across sectors. So across, protection, health, education, and gender. And we need more standards and normative guidance on how to address it for development partners. And thirdly, we need more evidence and data on what is the scope and nature of this issue. So the Global Working Group to End School-Related Gender-Based Violence, as it was called, was a partner coalition, which I coordinate and co-chair with UNESCO. And I've held that role since. It has been in many ways a highlight of my career because it has helped me to make the linkages between my past experience in the field with how to do policy advocacy in an effective way, and actually to see the results of that policy advocacy in terms of how now I see attention to school-related gender-based violence across, education programming, education policy documents, as well as in protection and within health. And that's just over the last 6 years. So it's been a very rich and meaningful experience for me to have been part of this. My journey, I'm from India. I started, with the Red Cross in India. Actually, I started with a small organization that used to teach street and working children, non-formal education. That's where I started. But I got a job with the Red Cross, and then my first international experience was actually managing a multi-million-dollar tsunami response program looking at education and mental health. So providing psychosocial support services through education and community-based programs. So it was a really first-hand sort of program management plus field experience, post-tsunami in Banda Aceh. So as a South Asian woman in a humanitarian space, it was very new. I was one of the only, I think. And at the time, the Red Cross, they were women, but very few. And it was mostly people from the global north. So it was a rich experience, though. I made a lot of friends who are my friends till this day. But what I wanted to say from that is that as I did that, and then I went on to do education emergencies work with Save the Children as well, what led me to I pursued a second master's sort of mid-career. What led me to do that was this thing that this disconnect that I felt between realities on the ground and how things work on the ground with policy processes. So I wanted to understand, why is there a disconnect, and how do policies get made? Who makes these decisions? And so I thought, the UN would be a great place to do that. And then I started thinking about what qualifications do I need? My master's in India didn't seem sufficient. And so I pursued a master's at the Columbia University School of International Public Affairs, which was again a very eye-opening experience in terms of meeting people from government, from private sector, from civil society, who were all doing had similar questions like me, and were pursuing a master's in public administration. And then I joined the UN after that. I guess in terms of what career advice, I all of the things that people have said before me resonates with me. It's all, I don't know if you're familiar with this term called squiggly careers. There are two women who actually talk about this a lot, about how your career is never a straight line, or, this is what I'm going to do, and then I will go to the next step. It's always a little squiggly line. And I think all of us have said that nobody made the decision to be something. They woke up and said, this is what I'm going to be, and then it came that way. So yeah, it's all about, I think, having that curiosity and the urge to learn. So to be guided by the role rather than the title and the, how it's going to lead me to my next career goal. It's important to think about that. But it's also important to ask the question of yourself, what do I want to learn? How is this role going to challenge me? And often you think about, are you, the organization, from the organization point of view, whether you want to fit into the organization, but it's also important to understand yourself and see that, the organization that you're in fits with you, in the sense of, you have your values and your way of working and your style and your contributions have to fit with also the team that you work with. So that's really important. So choose your bosses as well. It's really important to listen in this field of development, where there is a lot of there's an inherent power imbalance if we think about it, because we come with the knowledge, with the expertise, or we assume we do, and we are often working in communities and in spaces which have less resources, have less means to make decisions for themselves. And so I think it's really important for us to have that humility and the ability to recognize local knowledge, local capacities, and to build that and to lift it up as we work in development. And I always, my own value is to treat your clients. I think, the people you're working with are your clients rather than beneficiaries, in terms of, thinking about it as a service rather than as opposed to thinking about them as your partners and your people you're working with. So treating them the way you'd like to be treated. If we were in a similar situation of a disaster or a crisis and you lost everything, how would you like to be treated? So thinking about it that way. And lastly, I think I think I said everything that I wanted to say. Yeah, I think I'll stop there and wait for questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Sujata. So we're continuing to get some questions in the chat box. If you see those in there for you, feel free to answer them. We'll also have our open discussion right after our last panelist. So Lucy, welcome. You get to be our closing panelist. Good to see you again. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Will. Thanks very much for inviting me, and hello, everyone. Very interesting to hear also the previous panelists. I'm Lucy, and I lead the Strength Through Diversity project at the OECD in the Directorate for Education and Skills. For those of you who don't know the project, it focuses really on diversity, equity, and inclusion in education. And as in most projects at the OECD, it has kind of 3 parts. First part looks at analytical work, so building knowledge on, in our case, on topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So preparing working papers, preparing reports, doing data analysis with whatever data we can find, which in this field is actually not that much. Then the second part, we work with countries on country-specific work, analyzing their education system or parts of it in the on the topics of equity and inclusion and providing policy recommendations. And with that, we often work with external experts as well. And then the third main part is peer learning events. So we organize thematic policy forum, meetings with country representatives, webinars on different topics of interest to member countries. Most of it is with OECD member countries, but we have some colleagues who also work with non-member countries. And most of my work looks at many different things. So I do still analysis, mostly desk-based research. For country-specific work, we do visit the countries, although during COVID, a lot of it is virtual, visit schools, but most of it is really desk-based research, looking at different types of analysis we can do, learning also if it's country-specific, looking at national data, learning from the countries, and they give us lots of background information. So besides the analytical work, I'm also responsible for managing the project, managing budget, fundraising, recruiting and developing staff, and contributing to broader issues that are happening at the OECD. So currently there's a big focus on equity and inclusion in education. So there's lots of transversal events and also different topics that are explored across different projects. So I coordinate a lot of that work as well. Otherwise, I'm also responsible for being in touch and communicating, liaising with countries, ensuring that their priorities and interests are reflected in the themes that the project addresses. Also engaging with countries for country-specific work, for different types of events. So it's quite varied, and in between there is odd things like preparing blogs, preparing different briefing notes for higher level management if they go to some countries. So every day is a bit different in any case. But that more or less in short is a description of my positions and what I do and what the project does. My career trajectory is also quite varied. I came to the OECD after actually being a researcher and lecturer in the UK and the Netherlands, working on highly skilled migration policies in OECD countries. And I was always very interested in comparative policies, looking at education, skills, and migration. And I started the OECD as a young professional. I wanted to really work in internationalization, and my first project was looking at education governance. I was working previously on governance issues, but more for migration issues. So that's where I met in the project. That's where I met Will. And then after a few years, I moved to a different project looking at national skills strategy. So this was working very closely with countries on not only helping them to develop skills, but also to use the skills and the skills governance. So it was working very much close related with the countries and giving them policy recommendations. And then the Strengths for Diversity project started at the OECD. So I started working there. And in the first 2 years, we worked only on the integration of immigrants and refugees. So this was much closer also to my previous work that I did as a researcher. And then I took over as the project lead. So I came in with quite different policy experience, but with lots of transversal skills, looking at policy developments and working closely with countries and policy recommendations and doing a lot of analysis and research, which I still continue to do a bit outside the OECD. So again, you can have at the OECD there are many colleagues in Education Directorate, which coming from very diverse disciplines, colleagues, of course, for economists, sociologists, psychologists, education specialists, but also colleagues who have worked in or have more literature backgrounds. So it's quite varied, but most of them are at least working on education policy because they're very interested in it, or they have do have previous experience in it, but let's say that not everybody comes in with many years of expertise, depending on level of position in education. A lot of it is related also to the analytical skills that you bring, the motivation and the interests and the desire to develop skills and to learn throughout experience about education policy. So I think for me, some of the advices actually resonates well what the previous colleagues have said, that often, your career trajectory is not very linear. You might end up in very different positions, and a lot of it depends on, your interests and also who you are working with, and sometimes different topics become priorities. So, for instance, now education, equity and inclusion are very big topics. They were, of course, important for many countries before, but thanks to COVID, they are now even more important topics. And now, unfortunately, also due to the refugee crisis in Ukraine, it's just coming back to occupy many OECD countries in helping and supporting, for instance, refugee students, especially in host countries, but also internally displaced students. So sometimes different topics come up as well, and a lot of it depends also on your own motivation and keenness and your interest in developing skills and being what we've heard before, also able and willing to take risks. Sometimes you end up working on new topics that you don't perhaps have expertise in, but you develop and you take the risk and you develop your skills. And always the most important thing is that you're keen to learn throughout your whole life. So the jobs change, the skills sets that are needed can change as well. So important always continue developing your skills and learning new things and not being afraid also to be making mistakes and learning from them. So I think that would be some of the suggestions from my side. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Lucy. I think your last point is really important. I talk to students a lot and they feel almost paralyzed because they don't feel like they have the expertise to do some of these multiple roles. And your sense on, can you learn? Are you open to learning and taking that risk to it, I think is quite important. Okay, so we're going to move now to an open discussion. I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing. We've got about 20 minutes here. And once again, to participate, you either add your questions to the chat box, or you can raise your hand to participate. We'll try to take questions in groups of a couple and then open them up to the panelists. And if you feel like you want to respond to one of the questions, please go ahead and jump forward and unmute yourself. And if not, that's okay. We'll move on to our next round of questions. So I see that we've got one in the chat box. I'm going to ask Jingmei. One of the benefits she gets of helping to organize this event is that she gets to be somebody who gets to ask one of the first questions. So Jingmei, let's hear your question. Then if there's a third person who has a question, please feel free to raise your hand or add it to the chat box. So Jingmei, go for it.
Hi everyone. Thanks for your wonderful sharing about your working experience and help for advice. And I have a question about the diverse activities, because I think most of the panelists mentioned that in their work they will have the diverse activities to do, and I think it's hard to be expert in every work. And as the Milagros talked before, we can just manage our time efficiently and to deal with it. But I just wonder, is there other advice for us, especially for someone who is new to the working field, and how should we just deal with the complicated and diverse work? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So we've got one question in the chat, which so we're going to take this groups of 3 questions together. So if you've got a question, please go ahead and throw it in the chat or raise your hand. We got another question in the chat, which I think is a little more for Sujata, but this is asking about, so this is from, I'm going to messed with the name, I apologize. So Srilakshi, who is from India, currently pursuing a PhD in India and international and comparative education, and was asking Sujata if there's any other suggestions or advice for someone who's currently, for individuals to pursue a career in the international development sector with their degree coming from India. And then a conceptual piece from Sharon. Can I ask how international education policies affect local policies? So we've got 3 questions, one on kind of diverse activities, one specific to pursuing a career with a PhD from India, and one very broad on international ed policies affecting local policies. I know some of you can give a lecture on the last one, so let's not go into that. Anybody want to jump into any of these questions? Sujata, it might make sense to start with you since there's one that's specific for you.
Sure. Let me get her name 1 second. Sorry, I'm just trying to find her. Srilakshmi. Srilakshmi, I think my point about my degree, when I said, I think in Indian degrees from India, it's not less than any other, they're recognized degrees. So I don't think you should worry about that. I think it's more about how you build your experience in terms of what you want to do. Maybe look at the kind of jobs you want to have, and then build your experience and your PhD around those kind of issues. And if you're doing a PhD in international comparative education, what specific area would you like to work around? And I know, again, all of us have said that's hard to pinpoint at the get-go, but it's having a general sense of it and then going in that direction. I don't think so when I said that my Indian degree wasn't enough, it was in terms of what I wanted to pursue. I have a degree from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, a master's in development, and that didn't, I felt that didn't prepare me sufficiently around doing policy, policy analysis and those kind of things, which is why I did the SEPA program, which was more about, economics and policy analysis and looking a little bit at data analysis and all of those kind of things. So it was more about what I wanted to do in relation to my education rather than the Indian degree not being enough. So yeah, I would just suggest that you center your CV or your experience around the kind of work that you'd like to do, and your PhD, your specific topic area around that as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Sujata. Anybody want to talk more about the diverse activities? So a lot of you were talking about diverse activities. How do you prepare for a potential career where you're doing lots of different things? So Gustavo, any comments on diverse activities?
Yes, Will and Jagmay. Jagmay, you mentioned diversity, and you also mentioned the word expert at the same time. And I think that's the bit I would like to pick on, because, yeah, we don't need to be experts in everything, no, but we do need to be good. And there's a distinction, I think, between both, especially when we are starting. It is likely, though not guaranteed, that there won't be an expectation for you to be extremely good in everything. No? So I think, even though that will not be the case for all, it will be the case for many, and that's a positive aspect. Oh, and for being good, I think there is. It's about being ready to learn from examples, examples that exist in your organization, examples that exist elsewhere. And that this can be as simple as Googling Google very good examples, having conversations with people on your organization, honest ones. No, I need to do this, I need to do that, and I've never done it. What pieces of advice can you give me? Or do we have an example where I can look at? Try to do this relatively quickly, of course, no, depending on the turnarounds in your organization, and always be a good team player to identify what exactly is being asked of you, of that activity, what is not being asked, because it's likely that there will be lots of things that you believe are part of that job, of that task, and that are not. So a good team player with good communication skills, I think, should make the task see less daunting, more feasible. And yeah, if it happens that you land at the job where you really need to be an expert in a lot of things, then yeah, it's all of that and plus a lot of hard work. I don't think there will be a recipe for that, but in many cases, it is tough. No, it depends preparation and willingness, but still a distinction between expert and good.
Off. Thanks, Gustavo. Appreciate it. Millie, you've got your hand up. You want to jump in here?
Sure. So everything that Gustavo just said, plus I would say that yeah, like just don't be so hard on yourself. Many times I felt like when I was starting a new job, I was doing all these things and I almost felt like a master of none. You know, I'm doing all these things, but I'm not an expert in anything. So I would advise that also don't be afraid to reach out to your peers from other organizations, because they might be in the same situation and they might have really good advice to give you. So they're not competition. They're actually, we're all working towards the same goal at the end of the day. So just don't be afraid to reach out to them.
Excellent. Yeah, Lucy, I was going to come to you in a second anyway. So please do jump in. And if you can follow that, you talked specifically about transversal skills and your talk. I wonder if you can say a little more about what those are in this relationship, and maybe like how do you develop those during your studies? So go ahead, Lucy. Sorry, me to add to it.
Yes, I think it goes a little bit also back to the question about the diverse activities that, you know, you're at least an entry-level position. You don't expect staff necessarily to have expertise in everything. Like in education policies, it's such a big field. Can't be an expert in everything. Maybe you know more things about a certain area, but certainly not about everything, and it's not expected. The important things are these transversal skills, that you are an analytical thinker, that you are able to analyze issues, that you're able to, for our case, important that you're able to do research or data analysis. Not all of the positions are about data analysis, but you're able to analyze, for instance, policies or the information that is available, and can draw logical conclusions from it. Another, and related to the analytic thinking, is also very good drafting skills. So OECD writes a lot of reports, and many of the organizations do too. And so it's very important that you're able to write very clearly, very structured, to also an audience that is, you're often writing to a variety of audiences, can be policymaking, can be researchers, can be practitioners. Many of them don't have, for instance, English as their native language. So it needs to be very clear writing, and it's a very certain type of writing. So this is drafting, very good drafting skills. This you can develop throughout your degrees and in your coursework, and that will come in very handy. Other transversal skills are also very good oral communication skills. So in many cases, you'd have to give presentations about your work to a variety of audiences. Often you have to interact with policymakers, sometimes with ministers, with practitioners, with researchers. So you're able to convey your information and discuss certain types of policies or analysis with wide audiences. And this is again something that you develop throughout your studies, and then you would develop a lot of these things even more on the job. So a lot of it comes, of course, with experience and receiving the opportunities from your managers to develop these skills and getting constructive feedback on it. I think that's also very important. And as Gustavo already mentioned, being a team player is very important. In many of the organizations, you work in teams. You work in teams with people from very diverse backgrounds, different nationalities, different cultural backgrounds, and you work as a team. So if you can develop very good team working skills, it will make your not only your job much easier, but also your manager's jobs and your team and your colleagues' jobs much easier. And a lot of these things you can already develop throughout your studies or other experiences you can have, but you develop much more on the job as well with experience, of course.
Excellent. Thanks, Lucy. So we'll get around for at least one more round of questions. Lucy, you've got a longer question here from Veronica in the chat. It's a fairly specific question, so I'm going to let you answer that in the chat around it. Let me know if you have any challenges seeing it. So our first question in this next round will be from Niam, who has a question about qualitative analysis, specifically for Lopez, or for Gustavo, who's asking if you can speak a little more specifically about qualitative analysis. I think a lot of people assume that you need to have great quantitative skills here, but you mentioned qualitative and mixed methods. So especially for those from a background like Niam, from anthropology. We have also the second question from Julia, sorry. Says, thanks members of the panels, helpful tips. Wondering how relevant do you think is a European legal study background to work in ed development at the European level? So I know some of you have experience or have worked in this in Europe. So how relevant is a European legal background? So let's go with those two. And the third question on this, so those are fairly specific, and going to Gustavo, and then those that are familiar with working in European context. But I'd also like to have a broad question on, everybody here is talking about experience. We have a bunch of students here that may or may not have experience. And there's some great advice on, following your passion, and sometimes you need to have experience to know what you don't want to do. But how do you get that initial experience? So advice on getting your foot in the door, interning, your initial job, any of that. So I think those are the three things. How do we gain experience when experience is needed to get into the field? And then for Gustavo's, the question on qualitative analysis a little bit more. And then anybody who's worked in the European context about the relevancy of European legal study background. So Lucy, I see your hand's up. Go ahead and get us started.
Yes. So yes, how to get experience? That's a good question. I think a fairly easy way to get experience is, of course, through internships, where you can see if this is type of work you are enjoying, you can learn from. Sometimes it also opens doors for further positions. So we have lots of interns, and many of them do stay on as, let's say, internal consultants and eventually official staff. Or some of them also discover that this is really not the job they want to be doing. So they try different types of internships. So that, I think, is fairly easy way of figuring out if this is something for you or not, and it can also open door for further positions. And just one thing about the question about the European legal background, at least for OECD, there is a legal directorate, so for that they all have legal backgrounds. But even in education, like for instance in my project, hiring someone now with legal experience, but that person also has some policy experience. So it's also good to have, because all of our work is very policy relevant. It is helpful for some type of projects and some positions to have legal experience, but it needs in a way to have also policy experience, because we are not, at least most of the directorates, except for actually tax and the legal directorate, most of them is not very legal, focused really on legal issues, but others perhaps have other suggestions. I will answer still to one of the questions. I need to find some contact information first.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, Gustavo, you want to jump in? I know you've got a specific question, but also anything on the experience question, feel free to comment on that as well.
Yeah. So in terms of qualitative methods. I think I will answer based on the setting in which I work, which is very much about applied research, about evaluations, a consulting environment, projects that sometimes are very nimble, just a few months, others are longer. And during the COVID period, especially, you can make really very good, very interesting research and gather very useful insights for your clients using interviews, semi-structured interviews. Also, we've been doing lesson observations online. And of course, a lot of desk research, using qualitative data, even in very big evaluations based on quantitative methods. You will always have a part of the study that relies on qualitative data, on qualitative skills. For instance, as I was saying, with lots of interviews, and there is a very big demand for that, in this consulting environment for, as I said, very big projects, but also for smaller, nimble ones. Of course, that we could go much deeper in different types of designs, of research designs. And you mentioned, you are an anthropologist. So this can get easily very complex. So it would depend a lot on the study. But in a consulting environment, you will find for interviews, lesson observations, qualitative surveys, a lot of room and a good demand. And then in terms of experience, for me it's a bit special because I started as all of you with no experience, but in a different sector, which was engineering, chemical engineering. And honestly, it's always more or less the same. It's a mix of what is offered by the market when you were looking for something, what you can offer. And there's not much, I think, way of avoiding that. The difference is how much you suffer if the things are not, if the positions which you get at the beginning are not aligned with what you expect, and how much you can make this as a learning experience. Internships, volunteering positions, entry-level, junior positions, part-time positions, they are all excellent for creating hard skills and soft skills. And if you get one of these, I'm sure that the second one will benefit and will see as enough that you've had that first experience, that is a volunteering, a part-time, a fixed term one, one with perhaps a remuneration that's not as high as you would want. The issue is if you want to start in position number 2, number 3, number 4, instead of going 3 steps. And then 15 years after, when I was looking for my first job in international development education, it was exactly the same.
Okay, thanks, Gustavo. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up with one final question. And I'll try to incorporate a question that just came up from Alex in the chat box. But the final question is really a final tips question, right? So you've got mainly master's and PhD students here in the audience. As they're preparing to finish their degrees, what should they be doing to prepare themselves for the field? If it's skills or experiences or networks, or what are your tips for somebody that is just trying to come out? How do they take advantage of the time they currently have to prepare themselves? And and then I guess in the chat, if you have a question, any advice for Alex on how and where do you find out about organizations and jobs, then please go ahead and share those. But I'd love to hear kind of final advice from all of our panelists as we finish off today, and then feel free to add any specific websites or suggestions for Alex on where do you find these opportunities in our chat box. Saba, I haven't heard from you in a while. You want to get us started with your final advice for people that are just finishing their degree and want to work in this field? What should they be doing? Okay. So Saba, if you're still around, we'll come back to you at the end there. Sujata, can you get us started? What's final bits for our soon-to-be completed master's and PhD students?
Attending panels like this. I think networking is important in the sense that I don't mean network like, reach out to each and every one, but be very intentional about what the next step you'd like to take from, after you finish, and then read, LinkedIn is a great, an active place now to see profiles of people who have the kind of roles that you'd like to have maybe in 5 years or 3 years, and reaching out, having those conversations. Somebody said, in one of the panelists, I think mentioned also that there'll be, there's a fierce competition, but what stands you out is your personality. So don't be afraid to show it when you have these conversations. So it's not always about, I think, landing that job or landing that internship that you're looking for, but having conversations with people and making those connections, because you never know when you'll, that'll come to use. So yeah, I think as with everything, like being open to learning from professionals in the field, and then you never know what might open up. So I think being open to that possibility, but also not being very thinking about, okay, I'm doing this because I need an internship from you, kind of thing.
Yeah. Thank you, Sujata, for your final bits. Gustavo, what's your final insights and tips?
Again, I would say look out for the opportunities that are within your reach, within your area, within your region, regardless, if they are part-time, volunteer, maybe not paying as much as you want, because they are essential for you to be able to say in the future. And the future can be 6 months after what you want to be able to say, but you can't say now. So take small steps, but strategically and very quickly you will gain the first experiences that you need to be able to have your dream job. So yeah, basically that's it.
Thanks. Lucy, how about you?
I think it's quite similar. I think networking is important, just to be able to reach out to more people and learn also what they're doing. And sometimes you find out about opportunities for different positions very informally. Not everything is advertised, at least not temporary positions or part-time positions. But also looking out for the opportunities and applying to positions. And when things don't work out, the competition is quite fierce. Doesn't necessarily always have to do with you or your skills. Sometimes this particular skills are looked for or certain fit. So don't get discouraged if things don't work out. There are other opportunities. So why it's important to try many different things and really also try to get some experience, as Gustavo mentioned, in various ways. I talk a lot about internship, but there are many other ways you can get experience, because that will help for your CV, but also when you're applying for positions, show some experience as well.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Lucy. Millie, you get the final word. So what's your...
I would just add that while you're waiting for to complete your degree, and perhaps the few first months after you're done with grad school or your PhD, why don't you brush up on your languages? I mean, maybe you have a second, third language that is basic, intermediate level. You could just use this time to brush it up, and I don't know, maybe find mentoring opportunities, just opportunities to be able to practice it, because that actually comes in really handy. I had my French at kind of intermediate level, and then I decided that I was going to become proficient in it. I'm not, but I think it's gotten much better. I took every opportunity I had. Even when I was working in Paris at UNESCO, I took classes, within UNESCO, and that was really helpful. And I think now I'm the only French-speaking person in my team, and my supervisor, Tammy, really appreciates that. So, that could also help you stand out. And then there was Alex, who is a consultant for GPE. I would say that a good way to find small organizations that might be needing help is just look at funders and look at who they're funding. And those are really good sources of organizations that are always looking for help, and that they might not be able to pay you a lot, but they might give you something, and you can get experience of working on the field for them. We at EOL, I think I posted the website there. We work with like 60 organizations around the world that I'm sure will be happy to have any help from you. And you can contact them directly. And I'm sure other funders, I don't know, I'm thinking Open Society Foundations, Wellsprings, they also work with a lot of smaller organizations that you could reach out to. So those would be my pieces of advice. Don't get discouraged. You'll find something good for you out there.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I think we're just a little over here. I want to wrap up today's panel first by thanking all of our panelists for coming and sharing their experiences. It's been quite a diversity of experiences and career paths, and I'm sure our audience has learned quite a bit from your experience. So I appreciate you very much for taking the time all around the world to join us today. I also want to thank our events planning team, led by Jiang Mei, who, as well as Evelyn, Rona, and Mincha, who are helping in the background for this event. If you want to follow along and check out our other events that are taking place, please follow us on Twitter at Moray House CID, or you can follow the research group and see activities we're doing there. And we've also got a new master's program coming up in the fall. So if you're interested or know anybody who might be, please feel free to share with that. So I think that is it for today. I want to thank everybody for coming. Thanks for participants for joining in the chat and with your questions. It's been another wonderful panel. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now and thank everybody for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.